Most agree that it was in this amphitheater where the first successful public demonstration of inhalation surgical anesthesia with ether took place. On October 16, 1846, William T.G. Morton administered ether to Edward Gilbert Abbott for the removal of a vascular tumor by surgeon John Collins Warren at the Massachusetts General Hospital. The event is immortalized by Robert Hinckley's masterpiece, First Operation Under Ether, one of the most widely viewed medical images. This painting shows how the scene might have looked on that fateful October day. Although photographer Josiah Hawes is said to have been present during Morton's demonstration, he could not stand the sight of blood and left the amphitheater, thus missing the opportunity to photograph one of the most important events in the history of medicine. But months later, a reenactment of this dramatic event was captured in this photograph. Today, it is not generally disputed that it was Morton's demonstration that changed the course of medical history, ultimately leading to the field of anesthesiology. But the battle for humans' control over pain began much earlier. The Greek physician Dioscorides reported on the analgesic properties of the mandrake plant nearly 2,000 years ago. In fact, throughout history, alcohol fumes, soporific sponges, wine of opium, and other preparations with analgesic properties have been used with varying success during surgical procedures. Morton's distinction is to have publicly and convincingly demonstrated a reliable and complete surgical anesthesia. But Morton is not the only person who laid claim to the discovery that inhaled gases could render patients insensible to pain. Soon after his demonstration, an acrimonious dispute erupted between Morton and others who wanted credit for the momentous discovery. This feud became known as the ether controversy. 4 men are generally credited with the discovery of inhalation anesthesia: William T.G. Morton, Charles Jackson, Horace Wells, and Crawford Long. Each has a monument vouching that the distinction for the discovery of surgical inhalation anesthesia belongs to the person it represents. The introduction of anesthesia is one of the most fascinating events in the history of medicine, and it is celebrated through monuments dedicated to the individuals involved, as well as to the event itself. These monuments serve as tangible evidence to the stories that surround this extraordinary innovation in medicine. Morton's monument sits atop his tomb at Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Mount Auburn Cemetery, the first landscape burial ground in the United States, is the final resting place of many famous Bostonians, including Oliver Wendell Holmes, who suggested the use of the term anesthesia. Morton's tombstone reads, "Inventor and revealer of anesthetic inhalation." Jackson's monument, also at Mount Auburn Cemetery, consists solely of his tombstone. It also acknowledges Jackson as having discovered inhalation anesthesia. Although Wells was discredited and booed during his failed administration of nitrous oxide anesthesia, he has a variety of monuments supporting his claim. These include a bust in Paris, as well as a statue and his tombstone in Hartford, Connecticut. All assign credit to Wells as the discoverer of inhalation anesthesia. Crawford Long was not involved in the early portions of the ether controversy. However, he reported that he had administered ether before any of the claimants. A monument in Danielsville, Georgia, states that he is the discoverer of anesthesia. For years after Morton's demonstration, the fight for recognition raged and wore on the participants, and for some, the emotional and financial effects were devastating. Newspapers and journals of the time highlighted the intensity of the dispute. Almost 20 years after Morton's first public demonstration of ether anesthesia, Bostonian Thomas Lee, recognizing the magnitude of the event, commissioned architect Henry van Brunt to build a monument to commemorate the discovery. Von Brandt, a renowned architect in his own right, designed many notable structures, including Harvard University's Memorial Hall, a tribute to alumni who fought in the American Civil War. After the basic design for the monument was conceived, von Brandt wrote a letter to John Quincy Adams Ward, the preeminent American sculptor, asking that he sculpt the monument's crowning figure and 4 bas-reliefs. He wanted these sculptures to be symbols for the relief of human suffering. The monument was to be erected in the Boston Public Garden, a newly created public space. The history of this park, and of this monument in particular, has important meaning for Mr. Henry Lee. He is the president of the Friends of the Public Garden and a descendant of the monument's benefactor, Thomas Lee.
Well, Thomas Lee, the donor, was yes, my great uncle, and he had no direct descendants. That one reason, perhaps, that he could afford to give monuments. I'm told in family history that he was a fairly crusty individual, and he cared deeply about the purposes of this monument. He had many friends in the medical profession.
In various sites throughout Boston stand monuments and tributes to both renowned people and events. Why was the Boston Public Garden chosen to showcase this monument?
The Ether Monument was erected in the public garden, partially because the garden was new space in Boston. Remember, there was no Commonwealth Avenue Mall as yet, and the Common did not seem quite as an attractive site. And because the donor, Thomas Lee, selected this site for his monument, and because it was close to the new back bay that was being created for residential purposes. And I think that they chose very well.
The Ether Monument is not the only work of art that graces this magnificent public park. Among others, the garden features a statue of George Washington on horseback.
Well, the public garden is the oldest public horticultural garden in America, and its origins were English. Its design is very much in the English fashion of that time, with the meandering paths, with the serpentine pond, and it had been a garden run by a private group that reclaimed this area, which is marshland at the estuary of the Charles River. And when that private group was unable to continue its efforts, the city took over the space. And at that point, in the very early 1860s, the city set out to landscape it, had a competition which was won by an architect named Meacham, for which he got $100. and that design of Meacham's is pretty much the design you see today. So this is a Victorian park in its design.
The park has historically served as a place of relaxation and solace for Bostonians and visitors alike.
Well, people often ask me what I like best about the public garden. And of course, it's a beautiful place. The floral displays are wonderful. It has very handsome trees now. It has the swan boats, which are a great charm going around the pond. But I suspect that what strikes me as remarkable about the garden is its sense of tranquility. Somehow, despite it being only 24 acres, and being in the heart of the city, people come here to relieve stress, get away from it all, to relax, and it has that quality, even though it's surrounded by the hustle and bustle of a busy modern city.
The Ether Monument is located in the northwest corner of the garden and has been a prominent landmark in the city for over a century. The Ether Monument celebrates an event, not an individual. However, although none of the claimants' names are present, the monument refers by date to Morton's public demonstration. Despite its diplomatic avoidance of the ether controversy, it is clear that the builders considered October 16, 1846, to be the definitive occasion upon which the discovery of anesthesia lay. This connection to Morton did not go unnoticed. Mark Twain considered the monument a distortion of the truth. He stated, "Although the monument is made of hardy material, the lie it tells will outlast it 1,000,000 years." Through the years, the Ether Monument has withstood much criticism, both complimentary and disapproving. But the message it conveys is one of hope and comfort. Each of the 4 sides of the monument contains an inscription and an overlying marble bas-relief. These reliefs depict various themes related to the introduction of inhalation anesthesia. The construction of this monument began in 1867, only a few years after the conclusion of the deadliest war in United States history. During this time, the nation was healing from years of bitter divide. The northern face of the monument is inscribed with the text, "In gratitude for the relief of human suffering by the inhaling of ether." Above this, a relief presents a surgeon sitting by a field hospital tent with an anesthetized wounded soldier. Another soldier, his arm in a sling, stands, perhaps waiting his turn. Even though the Ether Monument celebrates the use of ether, most procedures in the Civil War were performed with chloroform because of ether's flammability, an additional hazard in a wartime setting. These photographs document the use of general anesthetics for surgical procedures during the Civil War. Indeed, contrary to popular belief, most amputations were performed under anesthesia. This engraving is representative of the chaos in which many of these operations took place. The southern face is inscribed with the words, "To commemorate the discovery that the inhalation of ether causes insensibility to pain, first proved to the world at the Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, October 1846. The overlying relief represents a surgical procedure in a civic hospital, the patient being under the influence of ether. One of the assistants appears to be washing his hands in a basin, denoting an appreciation for early attempts at surgical antisepsis. Although many reports are exaggerated, there was initial religious and moral opposition to the use of anesthesia. The monument quells this antagonism by characterizing anesthesia as a divine gift bestowed to humans for their relief from suffering. The inscription on the Ether Monument's west side comes from the book of Isaiah. "This also cometh forth from the Lord of hosts, which is wonderful in counsel and excellent in working." The suspected motive behind this inscription is to show that God's plan included the discovery of ether. The relief above this inscription features a woman in classical robes, personifying the triumph of science. She sits victoriously atop a pile of test tubes, burners, distillers, and other scientific instruments. To the right, a young woman sits with a child on her lap. The woman looks admiringly at the triumph of science, perhaps representing the gratitude women felt for anesthesia's ability to alleviate pain during childbirth. To the left, a man kneels in humility before the triumph of science. The inscription on the east side of the monument reads, "Neither shall there be any more pain." A quote from the Book of Revelation. The inscription sits below a relief, representing the descent of the angel of mercy. The angel floats above a suffering man, easing his pain, and by association, all of humanity's. A snake, a symbol often used to represent Satan, lies limp on a rock. The angel of mercy, and by extension anesthesia, have seemingly conquered the snake, freeing humankind from the agony of pain.
One should just imagine what it was like to people in the 1840s and 50s when a source of anesthesia was developed. When all operations before that had to be done without anesthesia. Just imagine just having all your teeth out, which everybody did in those days, one at a time with a pair of pliers. That alone, never mind more serious operations. And in the Civil War, you can imagine how important it was where they were cutting off people's legs and arms. So this was really a benefit that is almost incalculable. And something, as I say, we take for granted today, but which they certainly did not do in the 19th century. But it is still something that we can recognize as a wonderful boon to mankind.
The crowning element atop the Ether Monument is a life-size representation of the Good Samaritan parable. Here we see human kindness at its most precious moment, one person caring for another. Even the pool of water at the base of the Ether Monument can be seen as an allegory. Mayor Frederick W. Lincoln suggested that the pool serves in reminding the spectator of the pool of Bethesda, where the sick waited to be cured of their diseases. Originally, water flowed from the mouths of the lions, as if flowing from within the Ether Monument itself. However, as time has progressed, the elements and human negligence have led to the degradation of this tranquil spring of hope. The Ether Monument occupies a distinct place in Boston's rich and varied collection of sculptures and monuments. It has been admired for over 130 years, but the impression of permanence is deceiving.
One of the problems about monuments in Boston and probably elsewhere has been that there has rarely ever been endowment for their maintenance and care. And this monument was no exception. It lay abandoned for a very long period of time. And in the late 70s, we, the Friends of the Public Garden, joined with representatives of the anesthesiological community and societies, particularly Dr. Van Dam, who was enormously helpful to us in restoring the monument and bringing back the water, which had been gone for 20 or 30 years. And this was a very heartening gain. But within a decade, of course, the plumbing broke down, the monument began to deteriorate once again, and it required a new restoration.
By 2004, the monument was showing signs of aging, reaching a deplorable state that required more than occasional superficial treatments. The surfaces were stained and soiled with graffiti, and the pool no longer held water. Restoration materialized when the municipal government, private groups, and individuals worked together to assure a complete refurbishment of the monument. To secure the monument's proper maintenance, an illustrated book was produced for the purpose of raising awareness and creating a maintenance fund. The book presents the monument across the 4 seasons and describes its significance and the need for citizens to protect this magnificent structure. A groundbreaking ceremony for the new restoration took place in May of 2006, during which Dr. Glenn Stanley, then president of the Massachusetts Society of Anesthesiologists, the Honorable Mayor Menino of Boston, Mr. Henry Lee, and Dr. Mark Lima, then president of the American Society of Anesthesiologists, explained the importance of preserving the Ether Monument. The fountain and pool have been repaired, And now, lighting illuminates the beauty of the monument by night. As the late afternoon sun gives way to the rising moon, a man chiseled from granite stands resolute against the foreboding dark. He does not sway or shudder. He does not retire his duty to the one he holds. He rests atop a monument dedicated to human triumph over pain. He has no fear for the night air that quickly approaches, for there is a light. Anesthesia's radiance frees him from apprehension of what agony may come, and opens his eyes to a world of shining possibilities.